Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I'm rejoined by special guest Alex M.H. Smith. Alex, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me once again.
So today we are going to talk about value and how businesses should think about creating value in the market. But first, Alex, could you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do in case they didn't hear our previous episode?
Yeah, so I guess like many listeners, am yet another jobbing solo consultant in the field of business strategy. But I have a particular angle on all of that, which makes sort of strategy more simple, more accessible. I wrote a book, No Bullshit Strategy, which pretty much does what it says on the tin. And it's not a bad, it's not a bad positioning, I guess, on the basis that um, most companies do not understand and do not even try to do strategy in the first place. So um, there's quite a lot of work out there to be done. That being said, the flip side of that is that because most companies don't try to do strategy, most companies also don't try to hire strategy consultants. So they might
Right.
need it, but it doesn't mean that the demand is there. So that is my constant battle. But fortunately, with my audience on LinkedIn and stuff like that, I'm just about able to drum up enough interest for strategy to keep food on the table.
That is great because I think when I work with people, it's the first thing we work on. When I work with someone in my coaching program, it's like, okay, what's your objective? People can usually come up with their objectives pretty easily. And then it's like, and then they can come up with a million tactics that they think might get them there, but they're always in absence of a strategy. And therefore they end up with tactics that are like competing with each other. And they really, just most people don't understand what strategy is and they conflate it with tactics or a plan or something like that. And we talked about that last time. This time, we're going to talk about another word that is woefully misunderstood, and that is the word value. And the premise for this interview came from a message you sent to your mailing list, which is excellent, and I recommend people sign up for it immediately while you're listening here. And that BS word value is just wildly misunderstood by people. I talk about it in terms of pricing, but at least in that email, you talked about it more almost as like a differentiation or competitive advantage in the marketplace. So I wanted to kind of get your take on when you're working with someone, where do they go wrong with value?
So yeah, I mean the you sort of suggested before about how when you're working with someone there'll be like a sort of a strategy element to that work, and this is one of the reasons why strategy is such a bullshit word is because of course whenever people are doing a specific thing like a social media campaign or like moving offices or something, all of those things will have a strategy component. So strategy becomes a subcomponent of all these different activities that you're going to do. It's not a thing that stands all by itself, except for in one circumstance. And it's the one circumstance where everybody forgets to have a strategy. And that is the field of business strategy, as in your business as a whole has a strategy. So like people remember, oh, I need a brand strategy, oh, I need a social media strategy, oh, I need a sales strategy, whatever. People will remember all of that stuff because they're doing those activities. What they just don't see that the business actually has a macro strategy that ties all those things together. And this is where the topic of value comes in, because uh basically in order to know what is a good business strategy, we can answer that very simply by asking the question of, well, what is the job of any given business? Because if we understand what the job of a business is, then we can just direct our strategy at doing that job. And for every business on the planet, it's exactly the same thing. Every business on the planet is a system which is just a system that is put together to generate value, which it then trades for other value, i.e., money. And so because of that, we can see very, very clearly that the more value you manage to create, the more value you manage to generate with your activities, the more value you're going to collect. And business is basically as simple as that. So you just say to people, hey, just focus on creating as much value as possible, and then you are going to win. However, as you said, you then immediately, so this is the most fundamental, the most first principles, I think, articulation of what business is possible, but you still slam into the difficulty of, well, what does that word mean? What does that word mean? Value. And for a
Mhm.
long time in my career, I've sort of like I've made the argument I just made there, and I've said that the um, a business's strategy is basically the same thing as its unique value. But that doesn't mean, you say that, it doesn't mean that people then nail it, because what people will do is they'll go away and they'll come back and they say, hey, I've got it all figured out. Our value is dot dot dot, and then they'll say something which doesn't really line up to value. And I think it's because it is just still quite a vague, bullshitty word, because it but basically because it covers a huge amount of ground. Because value, it can be quite a hard objective thing, like this widget helps your machine turn out 5 times more rivets than it would have done with another widget. And then we have a very sort of like kind of numerical form of value that's being generated there. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you might have like a luxury handbag brand where all of the value is tied up in the brand and the way it makes a person feel and whatever. Now, you imagine those two companies, the handbag company and the widget company, both of those companies are generating value and exchanging it for money. But because the type of value is so different, we find it really hard to imagine like what is the commonality
Mhm.
between those
Yep.
things. And then you also get into a difficulty where, if we take, I don't know, like what is the value of a BMW, for sake of argument, people really will tie themselves in knots where they're like, well, it's a car, and the purpose of a car is to get you from point A to point B. So is the value that BMW provides about transporting you? But that applies, or is it something that's particular to BMW? The whole thing is kind of a mess. So this is why, uh, rather than, no, you could bash people over the head explaining, this is what value is, and this is what, and like, and if you were going to explain, if you're going to try to explain to someone what value is, it's pretty similar, I suppose, to the sort of the benefit of the thing, or the reason why people would want the thing. You
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah.
start to get there with that, because we can understand that the reason someone wants a Louis Vuitton handbag is not because it has like 0.75 liters of carriage capacity, right? So we can start to answer it, but people still have trouble with it. And this is why recently I've just been experimenting with a kind of like a different way of um, sort of provoking people to do strategy without using the word value,
Mhm.
where the kind of the notion is, instead of saying to someone, hey, your job is to go out there and create value, which then people will invariably kind of mess up somehow. Instead, I've been thinking about saying, your job is to go out there and create something or do something new that wasn't there before or wasn't being done before. Just do something new. Now, this, I think this is kind of clever, because people, the main issue that most companies have with strategy is that, or if we think about it from a consultant's point of view, the main issue that they have with their own strategies is that they never actually make any particularly interesting moves or do anything interesting or say anything interesting that you could reasonably expect to deliver a surprising result for what you're doing. So, like, you
Mhm.
can't just keep on doing the same old boring crap you've always been doing, and expect that then suddenly you're going to get these miraculous results. I think there's a Michael Porter quote. I literally read it yesterday. I was like, oh, that's a good one. I got to remember that, which was, the dream of most executives is to do the same things as everyone else, but to get different results than everyone else. And I think this is true.
Yeah,
Every
that's
dream,
good.
I'm going to do exactly the same thing as everyone because it's easy and safe, and I know where I'm at. But
Yeah.
I'm going to get these amazing results. And so
Right.
it's stupid on the face of it, but this is what we all do. So that is the issue, that like basically when people start tying themselves up in knots about strategy, like fundamentally, when all's said and done, where it nets out is that they don't do anything. They just don't end up doing anything sufficiently radical to get new results. So I
Hmm.
say, well, what about if we flip it and we start, forget value for a moment, just forget it completely. We start with the first principle. The only requirement is just do something new. So get the actual doing part, um, get the doing part sorted. And then I think that when we're thinking of what new thing to create or new thing to do, when we're trying to judge, well, shall I do this new thing or shall I do that new thing? It's sort of by definition, we're going to want to choose the one that we think sounds like a good idea, a reasonable idea, the thing that might work. And when we're going through that thought process, we're actually naturally going to be thinking about value without ever actually having to apply the word value to it. Because,
Hmm.
if I was, again, BMW, and I could say, well, why don't we make the interiors of all BMWs smell of cheese or something? Like that would be, that would be a new thing. That would be a new thing.
Sure would.
But everyone's going to be like, yeah, but like, how is that going to work? Is that going to like help us? Probably not.
Yeah.
So you see, they're already having the value conversation
Right.
without
Hmm.
having it, but they're having it from a foundation of, okay, we're actually going to do something. Step one, we'll do something. Now let's figure everything else out.
Mm. Yeah, it is clever. So one thing before I even drill into that, I want to sort of summarize something you said earlier that is, I think, at the heart of why people don't understand what value is, and it's because value is created in so many different ways, like the Louis Vuitton handbag versus the widget that 5x's productivity. It's like the actual value, the concept of value is basically the same. It's kind of like the benefit, like you said before. It's kind of like, how much money would I spend if I could wave a magic wand and have 5 times more output, or feel the way I feel with a Louis Vuitton bag? What's the most amount of money I would spend? That's how you would measure the value of the thing. But how the value is created is so different in both of those situations, and really every situation, that uh, that has to have something to do with contributing to why people are just so unclear about how to create it on their own. So that's real. I love that insight. Um, the, this most recent thing that you were talking about here of just like do something new, for crying out loud. And when you're considering your options, you're automatically going to be like, well, would that create any value for people? And there's this sort of like, is it a utilitarian value like the widget, or is it the way that you feel like the Louis Vuitton bag? Like, is it like, what is it? But that's going to happen automatically in the discussion of the group, I guess. So here's where I think that's an interesting way to get people unstuck and thinking about at least doing something novel. Folks I work with, a lot of them are from the software space, and they're very familiar with a concept called product market fit, which is basically not doing any market research before you spend a year and $1 million to build something, and then find out that no one wants it. So there's in our space, it's almost a cliche that people think, oh, I'm going to build a better mousetrap, I'm going to build a better Slack, I'm going to build a better Google, I'm going to build a better Facebook, and then no one cares because they don't understand, well, for whatever reason, because there already is one of those and we don't need another one, let's say. So it's a little bit, so the idea, so I want to get specific around what you would do next with a client that was like, we want to make a BMW that smells like, let's say, rose petals inside, not cheese.
Okay,
So
yeah.
like we're going to add like this pleasing scent. So they're all going to smell like an Anthropologie store, or, something like that, or cinnamon buns. So how would you then is it sort of up to the client to do their own market research at that point and say, like, does anybody value this? Would anybody pay for, like, saying, does anybody value this? Would anybody pay more money for a BMW if it smelled like cinnamon buns? So then what? Because novelty on its own doesn't create value.
No, what novelty creates is sort of notional competitive advantage, because if it's new, then you're the only one doing it, so you have complete ownership over that idea, whether it's good or
Hmm.
bad, which is already a positive step forward. And then, yeah, the sentence that I always revert to is, which sort of, you kind of like said it already, but like you're whatever the thing is or the move that you're going to make is, you're like, well, why would somebody want this, or under what circumstances would this be good for someone, or what type of person would want this, and this is the hunt for value fundamentally. The only real difference between this and the way that people normally do things is that we don't start with value and then work our way back to how are we going to create that value, which fundamentally, basically, we're not really smart enough to do most of the time. Instead, we start with the thing, and then we explore how can value be drawn from this, and under what circumstances is this thing valuable. And so if we take that, let's just take the BMW spelling of cinnamon buns kind of thing. Silly idea, fine, but then actually, well, hold on a second. When we actually then start, and I don't think it's very on brand for BMW, but nonetheless, when we start to pull the thread on that, okay, BMW smelling of cinnamon buns is a pretty stupid idea, but when we start to think, under what circumstances might this be valuable, we can start to see that there is a territory here over, like, making a car more of a sensory experience, more of a kind of like a hyper luxurious place to be. You're obviously more in the Rolls Royce sort of territory there. This is actually the sort of thing that they might well do. It actually doesn't sound
Mm.
that stupid in that particular world. You know, it might be, so you might pull the thread and you might go down a route of customizability. What if people could choose their sort of own sense? People apply sense to other things. People apply sense to, you know, washing up liquid, and obviously perfume, and like bed sheets and whatever. So it's so the point is that this stupid idea isn't that stupid when you start to twist it and broaden it and actually ask questions over, okay, could I see us create could I see us finding new market space here? And
Hmm.
normally the right idea is pretty self-evidently a good idea without you needing to market research it. Maybe I should say that with a maybe I should say that carefully, because I suppose I'm relying quite a lot on people's taste there, and some people think that
Yeah.
some terrible ideas are good ideas. Um,
Right.
but 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 at the same time, I don't think you can really market research it, because I don't think that you could have ever market researched your way to Crocs, for example. And Crocs is
Mhm.
now a $5 billion business. So some things, they just have to be done in order to prove that they work. We could never have just jaunted around and shown people a picture of Crocs and said, "Would you buy this shoe?" Like it just wouldn't have worked. So you got to be careful of having a crap idea, but you've arguably got to be even more careful um, of, of sort of just relying on an idea being innately researchable.
Right. It's wild because I feel like we sort of, like, the two of us sort of are coming at the same thing from different sides of the mountain. Like, we're both climbing up to the top to get to the same place, but from in a different way, or on a different path. So the way I think about, because what you're basically saying is, and my translation in my own head is like, you have to innovate, and at some point you can't just have the market tell you. You probably couldn't have market researched your way to an iPhone either. It's like, at a certain point, or maybe most things, perhaps most new things.
Yep.
So the way I think about it is, and maybe this is just because it's the space I'm in. It's like solo consultants and freelancers and that kind of thing. So they're selling services, and the way that I think about it is, I don't want, I'll just use myself as an example because otherwise it'll be too confusing. I don't want people to tell me what they want. I don't want to research and have people tell me, oh, we want you to start creating masterminds, or we want you to start doing this specific thing, and we would buy it. Because first of all, they probably wouldn't. I've fallen into this trap before where they're like, what would be great for you to do? You should do this. And then like, okay. And then I do it and no one buys it. So, right. So they're like, it seems like a good idea for someone, not me, not right now, but it'd be great if you should really have that. So I don't think that people are great at, if you interview them or potential clients or something like that, I don't think they're great at articulating the solution that they would actually buy. but they're fantastic at articulating the things that are driving them crazy. So this is where the innovation comes in my mind. So if you are aware of or stumble across like a really painful problem of some kind, and then that's very interesting. Like my website originally was called Expensive Problem. You want to find an expensive problem, which is a problem that someone would gladly write a big fat check to make go away. And once you see the problem, that's to me, that's where the innovation starts, where you're like, okay, a bunch of people that I would like to serve have this same problem. They're not getting enough leads, or they're not getting enough sales, or the morale of their team is in the garbage. There's terrible morale, or their brand is, not growing. Whatever the problem is in this audience of people, and then you can come up with 100 ways to sort of help them with that issue. Some things that are very surface level, some things that are very deep and get at the root cause. Uh, so I totally agree with you that you at a certain point, I like some feedback from the market. I want to know that there's some demand, uh, but that doesn't prevent anyone from then doing something completely novel to serve that demand. Does that align or misalign with what you're saying here?
Well, it's in some ways it misaligns because, well, obviously you hear that formulation quite a lot. Find a problem that people want solving, solve it, and then collect money, kind of thing. Which, of
Right.
course, is completely rational. But the only problem is that the number of problems that people are looking to get solved is incredibly narrow, generally speaking, and they are all quote unquote solved, maybe not well, but solved to the best of people's ability a million times over. So you see, so often you feel like you're looking for something that you just can't find. Now, so I mean, you said one example there, like oh yeah, the clients, the problem that the client has is, you hear this one all the time, don't you? Like, I just don't have enough leads, right?
Yeah,
So
that's the top
this is a
one. Yeah.
this is a massive problem, but like your awareness that that problem exists doesn't actually really help you come up with something new to new to solve it. So um so that's why I feel that like we almost, you might take it as a given that the client's looking to solve that problem. But if you start from, you're not starting with a completely blank sheet of paper. You're obviously starting with whatever general type of product or service you are in. If we
Hmm.
start from the norms of that product or service, and then we try to undermine them by doing something new, and we try to sort of like, and we try to like change the frame of reference, then you're going to come up with a new angle on that industry, which then you're going to find easier to sell to people. And even if the ultimate thing that you're helping them with, the ultimate sort of like a benefit of what you're, I mean, it's really complicated, but I'll try and make this clear. Like, like there's a distinction. Remember how I said like a BMW gets you from point A to point B? There is
Right.
a notional benefit of any product category or service category, which is kind of fixed. It's like there isn't much movement in it. And then and then the value is the kind of like the extra thing on top that makes me choose this one, not that one. So if I take my own case, like, if I'm doing strategy stuff, like, what is the client looking for? Like, oh, I don't know what direction to go next. Oh, we want to grow the business. But it's all just like completely like generic stuff, which you can solve in a million different ways. Now, my kind of like unique value as it is has actually got nothing to do with the problem that I solve for clients in terms of like what does strategy do for them. That's I'm no different than anyone else. My
Hmm.
my unique value is obviously all about the kind of like the simplicity and the style and the sort of like accessibility of the way that I talk about strategy. Now, if you think about it, like the way that I talk about strategy and like the simplicity of it, that doesn't really have anything to do with the end result of doing a piece of strategy work, which is ultimately generic, just in the same way that like the unique trappings of a BMW don't really have anything to do with the the category generic job of what a car does. So
Hmm.
what I'm saying is these client problems, the ones that you're likely to find people begging for, I need more leads, da 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 da. These are the category generic things that we just take it as read. You solve that, your competitor solves that, everyone solves that, because you can't actually even be in this category um,
Hmm.
without doing it. Where you're going to get your leverage is by essentially finding a sort of an additional second order thing to solve, which is sort of complementary to that, but which takes the conversation in a different direction. One thing that I sometimes say to people who are like consultants is that it's quite nice to sort of think about your pitch as a conversation change. So the conversation that the generic conversation that someone would be having in this industry.
Right.
And so
Hmm.
rather than saying, "Hey, listen, I know that you want more leads, and I can get you more leads," the frame of your conversation is a bit, rather than bragging about how you can get more leads, you almost you almost dismiss it, and you say, "Listen, of course, what are we talking about here? We're talking about getting more leads. Obviously, I'm going to do that, and frankly, so are the other people that you're going to speak to. You're going to speak to as well. But here's something that you haven't thought about." And then you kind of like you sort of switch the script, you flip the script, and you talk about a different angle to solving that same problem. So again, this is why it is quite tricky, because yeah, again, in this sort of whole value conversation, you really get knotted up between like what is ownable value, and that's why I always say, what is the unique value? Like, getting the client leads can never ever 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 be unique value, right? So
Right.
um uh but people, they when they try and answer this question, one of the common mistakes they make is that they just pick something which is actually just an expected form of value in that category. And then they say, "This is what we're all about." And I'm like, "Well, you're going to get no leverage, are you?" Like, again, if like, I mean, even like using the examples we used before, that we were being a bit flip, but they were actually quite bad examples, because, like, okay, fine. So I don't know, if a Louis Vuitton handbag, makes you feel like important, or whatever the feeling is, like, you aren't really describing unique value of Louis Vuitton. You're describing the unique value of an expensive luxury handbag. So you actually haven't gotten anywhere with that at all. Um, you only get somewhere when you drill it down to this particular company or this particular consultant, them and them alone. What is their X factor that they're bringing to the table, in addition to the fact that, yes, it has a zero point 0.5 centiliter carrying capacity. Yes, it makes you feel important. Yes, it's high quality materials. All of this stuff,
Hmm.
which is just what a bloody luxury handbag is. But what else, right?
Hmm. Right.
That problem approach can't really do that, I guess.
Yes, I agree. Maybe I'm thinking of people starting in a different place where they want to create something that there's not even demand for. You know what I mean? Like it's not even that, it's like it's novel, but no one cares, which is
Yeah.
different than it's not novel and no one cares.
Which, oh, yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of Domino's Pizza, what you were just saying about that sort of like special sauce of like, why is this luxury handbag different than that luxury handbag in a way that matters to the buyers? It's like Domino's Pizza, their guarantee is 30 minutes or less, or it's free. It's not even a promise of the quality of the product. It's not. It's like they're not even trying to make the product better. Like they're promising that you'll get it fast, not good. So and they seem like they're doing pretty well. So it's just an example of exactly what you're saying, where it's like, okay, we're a pizza place. We make pizza. People eat pizza. Everyone likes pizza, right? So it's like table stakes that you're going to get something round with tomato sauce on it. Like, you basically know what you're getting. So they decided not to compete on the quality of the actual product, where like a lot of places would do that and say, well, we have the best pizza. It's like, well, how do I? That doesn't seem like a credible claim. But they can credibly claim that we'll get it there in 30 minutes or less, or it's free. And then they've got a meaningful differentiator, apparently, because people seem to to the extent that that influences people's choice of pizza place,
Yeah.
right? So it's so I totally agree. The way I talk about this, and I know you don't like talking about positioning, but the way I talk about this is like, in a laser focused positioning statement, you are disciplined, which is kind of like the category you're in. I'm a
Mhm.
lawyer or whatever, uh, who helps specific target market, very, very specific target market. This is consulting. Uh, I'm a discipline who helps target market with expensive problem. Unlike my competitors, unique difference. So that's where you would bring in the special sauce. And I wouldn't say that's not an elevator pitch. That's just a sort of a way to think about your own business strategy as a consultant. That unique difference piece, it feels to me a lot like what you're talking about here. So like the unique difference
Mm.
needs to be something that is meaningful to your ideal buyers. And another thing I talk about that you basically also just said in a different way is like, you can't just be one of many. You have to be the one and only,
Yeah.
not the best, the only. So what, finding that space in, 2025 after 100, 200, 300 years of industrial
Yeah. Yeah.
revolution and problem solving and globalization, it's like all the obvious things have been solved. Like people, like you said, there's, probably 100,000 consultants who are like, or business coaches that are like, you need more leads? I can get you more leads. It's like, okay, great. 1,000 people are promising to get me more leads. How are you different in a way that I care about? And, it's like for people listening, the hard goods like the BMW and the Louis Vuitton bag, those, examples might not be landing so well because
Mm.
we're like, we sell something so intangible and I can hardly think of a situation where people would hire a consultant because of the way it makes them feel. Like, I suppose there's a luxury consultant who is like the most expensive or
I
something,
mean,
but
with celebrity consultants, I think they definitely would. If it was Simon Sinek or something like that.
oh, that's true. Okay. Yeah.
Uh, but look, I mean, I agree with everything that you say, and I think that one important thing to raise here, because I can already see where people would get this wrong, is that it can be quite tempting to think of this like um, this point of difference that you have. Even that term point of difference already has this issue with it, as being a kind of like a sort of like a little quirk or USP inside what you do. But your Domino's pizza example was an extremely good example because to be to qualify as a strategy, it has to be the overarching idea of the business. Like I said before, the thing that the business fundamentally does in a way that it affects everything else. So if Domino's is all about speed, that means that every single part of that business, including the composition of their recipes or whatever, is subservient to the speed of the delivery of the
Right.
pizza, which is exactly
Yep.
what Domino's did, and it worked really, really well. Now, in the world of like in the world of a consultant, like it is the same thing. You have to start in just like everybody out there has to do. You have to start in a well understood kind of like category of consultant, because otherwise it's just too difficult to generate like interest or understanding in what you're doing.
Hmm.
And then it isn't like saying, okay, I'm a leadership consultant, um, uh, and I'm a leadership consultant, but I don't know, but my uh, I don't know, like was a sort of random, sort of like little kind of faux differentiation point that someone would have. But I'm the barefoot leadership consultant, and
That's so funny.
and I'm sort of like super chilled out and whatever. And this is like it doesn't actually
Yeah.
really change what you do for the client. Like, to give an example of like someone who I did work with a little bit, who was a leadership consultant, hence me using this example. Like what she did, and so this is a good example of an actual like strategic move for someone like that, is that she sort of saw that like in the world of leadership consulting, you have like two sort of different speeds. You kind of have the more general like help people to up their leadership game and to become better leaders, which is a kind of a more day-to-day, the broader part of the market. But there's also a subset of the market which is more like kind of remedial leadership coaching and sort of almost like emergency leadership coaching, where basically if a leader is completely dropping the ball in an organization, they don't want to fire that person because it could cost them a huge amount of money. They want to try and make it work, and so they need to sort of like quickly. It's like a company turnaround, but for an individual leader, like a sort of leader
Right.
turnaround. And
Mm-hmm.
so she was going to make her whole thing, and did make a whole thing about this kind of like about these sort of like this sort of break glass in case of emergency with sort of problematic leaders, right? So it's not
Yeah.
about just
Yeah.
like leveling up your team or something. It's like, hey, listen, if you have an executive where ultimately like they're not performing, things aren't working, and you're like, shit, what are we going to do? That's when she comes in. So you see how
Mm.
like that is a very good example of of a kind of particular angle, which is reasonably ownable in that particular space. So it's still within the general concept of leadership coaching, but it's an entire company, I was sort of one person company, whatever, but
Right.
sort of an entire company proposal, which then affects everything that they do, and is going to be something that's meaningfully different to the client. So yeah, I mean, you can see why people get this stuff wrong, because there are so many like traps
Yeah.
that you can fall into. um, it's a minefield, which is why you've always got to just pull yourself back to the first principle of like what is the what is the fundamental thing that this business does above all else, and that thing needs to be something unique and fresh. I think if you adhere to that, then the rest of it can probably just about work itself out.
Yeah, I'd go a step farther, and I think I heard Rory Sutherland say this the first time. His point is basically like you have to decide to be mediocre at all the other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has an example of a restaurant where they went to all these his whole team, this restaurateur and his whole team went to all these 5-star restaurants or whatever it is, 3-star Michelin restaurants, and of course it was great. Of course, they were all great, and he was like, okay, what about the experience at any of these kind of stunk? And somebody was like, the beer choices were terrible and the coffee was mediocre. And so he said, that's what we're going to do. We're going to be the best restaurant in the UK. That we're going to have it for beer, like for beer snobs who want to go to a 5-star restaurant. We're going to be the one. And they basically were like, we're not going to be wine snobs. I don't even know if they sell wine. They probably sell it, but it was just like, the idea of like, we're going to be different in this one particular way. It will matter to beer snobs. And, evidently it was successful for them. But the key point is like, it's like Domino's doesn't need to deploy resources to make their pizza better. They need to make sure it gets there fast. I think it would be a mistake to think I'm going to be great at everything, but I'm going to specialize in this one thing. Being great at the one thing, the executive turnaround or whatever, it's going to force you to kind of be mediocre at a lot of other stuff.
Exactly. This is the fundamental thing where like, you people don't realize that if you choose to suck at some certain things, it gives you a huge amount of flexibility to do other things that are incompatible with those things that you're sucking at. So
Mm-hmm.
so even like, if you take, what I do, like if you compare me to like the platonic ideal of a strategy consultant, right? There are certain things that I have basically just put in the bin, right? So like, so for example, like research in my version of strategy more or less goes in the bin. That isn't because research isn't important or useful, but like I'm trying to visualize, well, what does strategy look like without spending thousands on research and analysis? Rigor,
Mm.
it kind of goes in the bin. It goes in the bin because like if you create too much complexity and too many hoops for people to jump through to do the strategic work, what happens? They just don't do anything at all. Whereas if you lay out a kind of more streamlined sort of like rough and ready version of strategy and they actually do it, well, you're going to achieve more by doing a rough and ready version of strategy than not doing the perfect version of strategy. So you see how like I have to put these very important things in the bin in order to then create the whole sort of no bullshit strategy school of thought. I can't
Mhm.
create it by being good at everything, right? And so like it everything ultimately at the end of the day is always going to come down to you looking at your category, looking at the norms of your category, looking at what your competitors value and saying which of these things am I prepared to put in the bin, and of course what then might the benefits of that be. And the beauty part is that you're probably already doing this but not on purpose, right? Because
Yeah, exactly.
everybody's a bit rubbish at something. And what about
Mhm.
if you just like owned it, right? What about if you just lent into what you're rubbish at and then explored the hidden benefits of that weakness? And every single weakness on the planet pretty much has got a flip side
Some
benefit
flip
to
side. Yep. Yeah, that's great. Big fan of that. So, as we wrap up here, do you think the example you just used with the executive turnaround is basically a specialization? What we're just talking about here
it.
is like picking one thing for consultants, picking one thing to get really good at, and being fine with all the other stuff that you're not good at, and not trying to be great at everything. So, do you think that ultimately this value creation in this point in time at this point in time is essentially a specialization exercise, or is that just one for consultants?
Dangerous, dangerous, super, super dangerous. I mean, in some senses, the answer is yes. In that, isn't all strategy a form of specialization? As in, like choosing, we are going to like be about X, so therefore, whatever X is the thing that we sort of specialize in. So, in some senses, the answer is yes. But the problem is that like it's very, very similar to the whole niching down thing, which I'm very against because people interpret this. It basically just like people unavoidably basically interpret it as, oh right, so I need to just become really really small and just do something that has got like the tiniest addressable market in the world until it's so specific that I'm literally the only person in the world who does that like one particular kind of who does that one particular thing. Now the net effect of this can work, this kind of thinking, but I think in general the net effect of it is that people just, number one, they trim their potential market down to such a small size that uh, that uh, that they kind of they do damage to themselves. And then secondly, they also make a massive error, which is that they sort of think, if I do website design and I specialize like, oh, website design for like dentists or something like that, um, you've got to ask the question, like, is it actually is that actually good for a dentist to hire a dentist specialist? Oftentimes the answer is no. Like oftentimes specialization actually makes what you're offering look shittier than the more generic option. Like if I was doing an ad campaign for basic arts, would I rather get Wyden and Kennedy to do that or get like some advertising for solo consultants to do that? Obviously, I think Wyden and Kennedy would be better. I couldn't afford them, but like it would be like the niching doesn't necessarily actually create new value for the customer. The only reason you're niching is because you're basically running away from half of the market. It's almost like a cowardly move. And so the specialism point, it has that
uh,
same it has that same issue with it. So I think that like less than niching, but it still has a bit of a whiff of that. So I think that you need to think about it in a way whereby what I like to think is that like whatever you're doing, whatever your company's all about, it needs to be applicable to lots of different types of customers in lots of different scenarios. So, um, like, let's just take that leadership turnaround example. So,
yep.
it is a special it's a special it's a specialization in a kind of situation that might occur, but that
Right.
situation occurs extremely broadly. Is it corporate? Is it smaller businesses? Is it like women? Is it men? Are these people very, very senior? Are these people more junior? You can chop this up. So then there's optionality for the consultant of lots of places they can go. In my case, like at the moment, I'm literally working with like a company that has got a God, I don't know, like 40K turnover, and a company that's got a 40 billion turnover. Where is my niching? Right? There is no niching because I am about a certain school of strategy, which you can apply to corporates, you can apply to SMEs, which you can also apply to consultants, which you can also teach to other strategy professionals, blah, 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 blah. Again, I've got optionality. I know what the core value is I'm offering. And then I ask the second question, right, who could this help? Who would be interested in this? Boom, 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 boom. I've got all these different like options, just like how IKEA, we all know what IKEA does. Cheap designer furniture. Boom. They own that. But
Yeah.
you've got students, you've got people with tiny flats who need the storage solutions. You've got people who've just bought a new house and they're like trying to they're trying to do the whole house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like, is IKEA a specialized company? The answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that they are a company with a ridiculously laser targeted scenario beyond which they can't roam and play. And I just have a bit of a problem with that. There are exceptions 100%, but generally I have a bit of a problem with people going just like, super laser focused and thinking that it's going to solve all their problems.
The thing that I think gets lost in the niching or the specialization thing is, again, this is for this audience. I'm not saying this is broadly universal. Like if you make flashlights or something, like, you're not going to make flashlights for dentists. That'd be ridiculous. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe that's not ridiculous. Maybe it's not.
Yeah.
So, but with the people I work with are so generic in two ways. They are totally generic in their skills. I'm a full stack web developer. I can do CTO. I can manage people. I can do everything. They basically think like an employee, and like their marketing is kind of like a resume, and they'll do it for anyone. So they're just this complete, just one of many web developers or React developers or even landscape architects or mechanical engineers. But these solo professionals are so skills oriented, and they like learning new skills. They have they're general in two dimensions: who they help or what problem they solve. So basically, who they help and what problem they solve is kind of the same thing to me. So it doesn't need to be like who they help doesn't need to be a vertical like dentists. It could be executives who are, potentially going to get fired, or leaders of any kind. Like
Sure.
your target market doesn't have to be a vertical.
No.
It could be a psychographic like skeptics or Democrats or whatever.
But you would agree that a lot of the time people lazily just like revert to the vertical thinking because that's sort of
That is a problem. Yes, that is
top
a
of
risk.
mind way that people do
That
it.
is the top of mind thing. Yes, and it is lazy, and you're right. That is risky because it almost never works. It's too obvious.
Exactly.
But something more like a psychographic is much better.
Yeah, and there I completely agree with you. I actually have a question for you. If we've got a couple more minutes, because I really am
Sure.
genuinely curious about this, because obviously you know more about consultants than I do.
Mm.
Would you? I work on the principle that like everybody needs to root themselves in a recognizable category of service which their customers would plausibly be shopping for. And so like, like web developer, like copywriter, brand person, whatever. And then after you've like established that general place, then you can play ball. Now,
Yep.
if you were to just only think in terms of problems that you're solving, and you sort of
Hmm.
like you kind of throw the category out of the window, and you just say like, right, this particular thing that can come up in such and such a type of company, I
Hmm.
deal with that. Now, without actually rooting yourself in a particular thing, and everybody, they could be at a push rooted in something. Nobody's like doing something that's completely unprecedented, but
Right.
people will sort of like sometimes resist that because they'll be like, because they find it to be somehow reductive. Now, would you
The
agree with
buyer or the person who's positioning
the
themselves?
person who's positioning themselves? They might think it's
Yeah.
reductive to say, oh, at the end of
Hmm.
the day, you're a web developer or whatever.
Mm.
Would you agree with me or disagree that if people just go pure problem without rooting themselves in something that customers are already shopping for and understand, they're creating hard work for themselves?
I totally agree. Yeah. And that's in the laser focused positioning statement. That's the discipline at the beginning. I'm a lawyer.
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah, you did have that, didn't you? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad that we agree on that because yeah, I was like, that's what I believe, but I wasn't 100% confident of it.
Yeah. It's hard to, because, and you said it perfectly, you're just creating a lot of work for yourself because people they want to understand quickly. It's like that, a really common way to do like a really fast basic position is like, I'm like X, but Y. So like, I'm like
100%.
Uber, but for dogs.
Yeah.
And you immediately like know what Uber is and you know what dogs are. And maybe you can imagine you need to get your dogs transported around, but it's like, yes, it's you're, if you don't do that, you are, you can free ride on somebody who already did, billions of dollars of marketing by
100%.
saying I'm in this category. It also reminds me of writing. If you're writing fiction, especially, or movie or whatever, uh, newbies will want to do like this genre defying thing. They don't want to be, I don't want to be just a thriller writer or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sci-fi. I don't want to be pigeonholed as a horror writer. It's like, you have to do that because people are looking there, because they like a genre. They don't like thrillers. They don't like horror. They do love romance, whatever. And then inside of that, like, there's certain things you have to do in a thriller or it's not a thriller. So it's the same in music. I went to music school. It's the same with music. If you want to sound like you're doing jazz, if you want to be a jazz musician, there are certain things you have to do or it's not going to sound like jazz. So there, and the teachers back then, they would say, there are no rules for music, but there are style practices. And it's this sort of similar thing. Like, a human wants to sort of orient you in a space very quickly. Like, what is this solution that you're potentially bringing to the table? What flavor is it? Like, is this a legal thing or is this a marketing thing? Or, so yeah, I think it's super important. And if you don't do that, you're just giving up a lot of free marketing.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Very well said. And in my own case, it's always it's a funny exception. It's like the exception that proves the rule. And so I always say to people, you got to be sort of a bit careful copying my scenario because business strategy, like I said at the outset, is not something that people have an intuitive understanding. If someone says, "What do you do?" and you say, "Oh, I'm a lawyer" or whatever, then people get the gist. When I say, "Oh,
Hmm.
like strategy," like nobody knows what I mean by that. And there's always the follow up question, or what do you mean by strategy? And blah, 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 blah. So, like, I am against that rule. But then the only way that I've managed to overcome it is that obviously, if you get enough of an audience, then you can
Exactly.
then you can actually educate the market and you can brute force your way through. But
Right.
like that, if you don't have that, as like for a decade, I was doing this without that. Basically, you're getting like 6 or 7 leads a year, and your
Yeah,
conversion damn
exactly.
well better be good.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's not a good way to be.
Agreed. Well, I know we got to wrap up, so let's leave it there. But this has been super helpful. Thanks so much for joining me again.
No, cheers, mate. It was fun.
Where can people go to find out more about what you're doing and maybe sign up for that excellent mailing list?
Oh yes, I made a little welcome page for podcast people with a whole bunch of resources, free resources and stuff on there at basicarts.org/newsletter. Where, no, sorry, yes, I was the wrong one. You can go there too and sign up for the newsletter. No, basicarts.org/welcome. There's my book there. There's the YouTube channel. There's some free downloads. So yeah, you can have at it.
Excellent. Yeah, the videos are great too. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Cheers, mate.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time for Ditching Hourly.